Welcome back to the channel. Today we're working on Patrick's 335i. We're going to be installing new suspension components, ECS tuning, coilover system. So probably similar to BC Racing, but it's nice to know that they have their own branded name suspension parts. It comes with adjustable end links, and it has camber plates and also dampening adjustments. So we're going to go ahead and get the car on jack stands first and then start on the front. We're going to remove this E14 external Torx bolts, and then we will remove these later, because if you remove these now it's going to drop down. If you want an in-depth guide on how to install coilovers, I'll post a link in the description below, but we're just going to be going through this pretty fast since we're running out of daylight here. We need to undo the end link right here, which I believe is a 16 millimeter. And then we also gotta undo this knuckle, which I believe is 17 or 18 millimeter. And then move aside brake lines and sensors so that nothing gets pulled when we bring this hub down. All right, so we're gonna remove the 3 13 millimeter bolts up top now, and then that'll allow us to drop this slowly. Bam, okay, we're good. So we're going to use the spreader tool here to spread the knuckle and then pull out the old strut. Okay, now that that's spread open, you just leave it there and then you can pull this out.
Oh.
Wow.
When you put the strut in, you want to make sure that these two bolts are lined horizontally. So if you have a strut bar, you want it lined up with the strut bar. And then we go up. And then as I lift it up, Patrick's going to put the 3 13 millimeter bolts in. So we're jacking up the front suspension to put it under load before you tighten all the bolts, just to make sure that everything is properly torqued. So we're adjusting the dampening. To the left is softer and to the right is harder or firmer. And it's got 30 clicks of adjustments. And then we've got the first coilover on. Now we're going to do the other front side and then move on to the rear. So we'll get back to you guys when we're into the rears next. So this is the height difference between the two. Stock one right here, and then the new coilover strut.
It's about 4 inches.
Yeah, it's a big difference. Okay, so we just lowered it to the ground and we guesstimated the height. Looks like we got about 1 finger's worth of finger gap. So we're gonna do the rears and then drive it to the shop where there's a little more light, and there we can figure out how to set the height. But right now this might be too low. I don't even know if we'll make it without rubbing a lot, but damn, that looks a lot better than stock.
Looks a whole ton better.
Whole lot better. Okay, so when you're working on the rears, we got to take apart the liner. Once you got the liner apart, you're gonna access it right there. Just take out this rubber piece, and then there's your top hat. Here's the rear brakes from R1 Concepts. So for the rear, it is a separate shock and separate spring. So we're going to be basically loosening the control arm right there, and also the shock bolt, which I think is an 18 millimeter. And then we can drop the spring and the shock from the top nut up there inside of the trunk. So far we've got the shock out already. Now we have this lower control arm loose. We got the spring out. This top hat over here, you have to hammer it out because you can't reuse this. There you go. If you try to reuse that, you're gonna mess up your suspension. This is the new one. You don't need to put the bump stop right there. This one already has the bump stop. So we're going to be cutting off this foam piece and then putting it on the metal spacer of the new thread so that it fits properly. You need this part, otherwise it's going to make noise at the rear section. So this is the new thread. It's much thicker than OEM, so he's going to put that soft piece on, then the metal spacer that they provided, and then the nut that they provided, which should fit properly. So this is an 18 millimeter wrench with a 6 millimeter counter hold, or is it 5 millimeter? 5 millimeter. Moment of truth coming down on the rear. So it looks like the rear, we maxed out the rear and it's pretty high up. It's like 2.5 fingers to 3. It's actually higher than stock, remember? So Patrick is torquing all the wheels right now. And then we're going to adjust the ride height tomorrow when there's more daylight. But for now, this is what we ended up with. We raised the front a little bit so that we can at least get it out of the driveway. Okay, so it is the next day and we're going to be adjusting the height on the new coilover suspension setup. This is what it looks like during the day. Very nice. We got the red control arm there, upper I believe, and then we have the springs and the shock. And this is an ECS tuning coilover system. To adjust the rear, it is, in terms of adjusting the height, it's going to be done through the spring. The shock body is adjusted when you first install it to set the preload on the spring. We're not going to worry about the preload, we're just going to worry about adjusting the height right now. So you want to loosen this top collar here, and then if you want to go lower, you want to reduce the number of threads, and if you want to go higher, you need to increase the number of threads. So we want to go lower, which means we're going to be going upwards. We're going to be reducing the number of threads up the top to make this a little lower, maybe about a finger gap lower. Top collar loose, go ahead and then bring it up until it's about 1 finger gap. Set it to where you want, so right about there you'd say. Go ahead and then start turning the lower collar towards going upwards, so towards the right. This is going to take a couple of turns to do, and it's not going to be easy. Okay, so now that we've raised this collar up to close the gap, we can go ahead and then turn the top collar down and lock it. Go ahead and take that smaller wrench and then lock it in place so that this doesn't loosen over time. And then you're done. You can go ahead and put the wheel back on. Onto the front coilover. So for the front, to adjust the height, you want to loosen this lower collar. And then we were just going to lower it maybe like 1 thread, so right about there. And then to lower it, you want to basically turn the top portion in so that it goes lower. So you're threading these threads into the shock body. But if you want to go higher, then you want to go lefty, which means you're increasing the number of threads going up and twisting it out of the shock body. So we're going to go into the shock body to go down a little bit lower. All right, once you've got your right height, we've lowered it about 1 thread, just a very tiny amount. Go ahead and then lock the lower collar. And you're done. Go ahead and put the wheel back in and you're ready to go. So we're driving it forward and backward a few times to settle the springs, and then we're going to recheck if we need to make any more adjustments. Right now, Patrick is running squared setup wheels. I believe they're 9.5 all around, which is too wide for the front. The wheel wouldn't even fit because it would rub on the collar of the strut. So what he needs to do is run a staggered setup, wider in the rear, thinner in the front, because right now the front wheel pokes out since we had to put 10mm spacers to make the wheel fit so it can clear the shock body. But right now I think height wise it looks really good. We don't have to make too much adjustments. It's more of a wheel adjustment now. Maybe 10 in the rear, 10-inch width, and then 9-inch or 8.5 in the front. I know he wants to run squared, but I don't know if it can work in this setup. He'll have to do staggered to get a really good fitment. Right now the front is poking out a lot because it's a 9.5-inch wheel with a 10mm spacer. And then the rear is tucked in, so he can go wider in the rear. So we've got 4 people in the car, and the front is rubbing a little Again, it is squared setup, so it's a bit too wide in the front. But overall, not too bad with 4 people in the car. Overall, these ECS tuning coilovers are really comfortable for the price. They actually ride pretty well despite being on max dampening. We maxed it out to 30, so it doesn't rub as much. The car does rub, or the tires rub a little, but that's because of the setup that he has. It's pretty aggressive squared setup, so it's going to rub regardless. So overall, these ECS tuning coilovers are a good deal. I think they're good quality, comparable to BC Racing and the Megan Racing coilovers that you see all over the internet. We have the fitment dialed in now. Once you have the height dialed in where you want it, you want to go ahead and get an alignment done because you want to make sure your tires don't wear out too quickly. The alignment might be a bit off, so it should help it drive a little better. You could also ask them to add some negative camber if you'd like to reduce some of the rubbing, if you're able to. Overall, I think it's a good coilover system, and I think you guys should buy it. So we'll leave a link in the description down below. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Have a good afternoon.